Do you have a car in the DC metro area? I do, and sometimes it can be a real bummer. But that's why there's Car Care to Go. Car Care to Go is the future of car maintenance and repair, and it's now as easy as ordering groceries online. They'll pick up your vehicle from your home or office and bring it back when the work is done. You can get your first synthetic oil change for $20.23 with the code FIRST20. Book now at carcaretogo.com.
Today on CityCast DC. In an effort to increase public safety, DC police launched a nightlife task force. But what does that even mean? Axios DC's Chelsea Ceruzzo recently reported that the task force might be here to stay. So she's here to tell us why there are police in our clubs and how business owners and partygoers feel about it. It's Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. I'm Bridget Todd, and this is CityCast DC. So Chelsea, I know that you recently wrote a piece for Axios DC about the Nightlife Task Force that was launched last year. For folks who don't know what that is, fill us in. What do they do?
Yeah, of course. So in June of last year, DC announced they were launching a task force to help curb violence in 3 nightlife hotspots. That included U Street, H Street, and the DuPont Circle area. And this task force isn't just police. It actually includes a lot of different agencies. For example, the Alcohol and Beverage Regulatory Agency, transportation officials, as well as officials that could move cars, things that are improperly parked. So it really is a pretty big collaboration with a lot of major agencies around the city.
How exactly does it work? Like, are the cops and, folks in the task force, are they inside clubs and bars? Are they on the streets? How does it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was part of why I decided to look into this, because I was very curious as well. There are around, I believe, 40 people on the task force. And the way it works is that not only are they kind of out on the street walking around, one of the examples that MPD gave me is that in certain areas on U Street, they were finding people were just kind of having pop-up parties out on the street with music, and it was creating kind of traffic jams. So having people out on the street to ask people to leave is one thing that they were doing. But the other thing was they said they were visiting, and this continues today, visiting restaurants and bars and other nightlife venues to kind of make sure everything is okay. Are people being served the correct amount? Is anybody being overserved, perhaps, that which may potentially lead to a escalated or violent situation? So the goal of this is kind of identifying these issues before they become potentially violent scenarios.
So I remember back in July reading that the task force was supposed to operate through Labor Day. Obviously, it sounds like they've kept it going. Does that mean that it's working, that the results have been positive?
That is what MPD told me, that they felt as though the results were quite good and they felt positive about it, which is why they decided to continue the task force. They extended it after Labor Day through Halloween, and now it actually was extended again and continues sort of indefinitely now. And in fact, MPD told me that they are thinking about piloting it in other parts of the city. I do have some numbers that they shared with me as well. Almost all the corridors that were identified, they saw over a 50% decrease in violent crime during those weekend nights that the squad was operating, compared to kind of the same period last year. So during those weekend nights. That said, in H Street, for example, overall crime did increase by 8% over that same time period. So there were a lot of successes, which MPD has touted, but of course, we did see some crime still increase.
So MPD feels like it's more or less going well. What are other folks saying? Do bar owners and club owners like it? Does it make folks feel more safe, less safe? What are they saying?
When I spoke with different bar owners, venue owners, and industry folks, a lot of the sense I got is they just don't really know what this task force is doing. A lot of them were surprised to learn that it's actually still ongoing, and some of them actually did have some frustrations. So, for example, a few different places told me, including Sandra Basanti with the Pie Shop DC, said that early on, having all of these agencies involved in the task force meant that inspectors were coming in during nighttime hours when they're extremely busy and they weren't expecting an inspection or expecting to have to answer to officials in that moment. And that doesn't mean they were trying to hide anything or had something going on. It just added to this sort of stress that they were experiencing. Another venue owner of DC9 told me that since this task force has been put into place, there have been road closures in front of his venue, and oftentimes police will have their police lights on, which to him does not feel like a solution. And he actually feels as though people see that and think, oh no, something's going on over there. Let me turn around and not come. And then the flip side of things, a lot of them did tell me they have seen some decrease in crime. Like I said, DC9 said that they had noticed a decrease in gunfire around the venue and a decrease in ATV activity. But a lot of it was just a sort of confusion or really just uncertainty about how much this task force is doing and how it's actually working for the business owners that it's supposed to work for.
Yeah, something that really came through in your Axios piece, I guess, was that sense of frustration around the lack of communication from MPD. You know, is the task force still operating? What are they doing and for how long? It sounds like that basic communication was definitely a place of improvement for this program.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, a few owners told me that in the beginning there were safety walks, which was basically just walking around the block with MPD or community meetings. Since then, they say the communication has been pretty lacking. And I think it really comes back to that central point that this is supposed to be working not just for consumers, but also for businesses, which have just been so hit hard in the past few years, not just from crime, but also just the pandemic and trying to get customers back, that of course crime is a concern for them. But they wonder, if this is something that's for us, why aren't we more involved in it?
You mentioned sort of the pop-up DIY kind of kickbacks, I guess I'll say, that you see around the city. Is there a sense that this is kind of killing the vibe? Obviously bars and clubs have to meet certain regulations to operate within the city, but not every event or nightlife that you see is sanctioned. And so I wonder, how do you see it impacting kind of DIY party vibes in the city?
And I have been thinking about this a lot today. I recently had a conversation with the new director of Nightlife and Culture in DC. And of course, this is separate from the task force, but they are obviously very involved in the nightlife. One of the things that they've been trying to do is recognize that some events, like, for example, Mochella, everyone knows about it, police know about it, the city knows about it, but it's not an official event. But it's an event that brings a lot of people together through go-go, through something that's really important to many people. And then unfortunately last year there was an incident of crime at Mochella. So what he was talking about was, how do we make sure these events can continue, even if they're not official, in a safe way? That said, I think not everyone wants their event to be official, right? So I think there's certainly a balance here. I would definitely love to know more from organizers of these sort of events, or just people who, don't want to go into a bar and spend however much money for a beer, and maybe just want to hang out with some friends. How can they do so safely and without kind of rubbing into this tension?
Yeah, and I think the word that you used, balance, is really the name of the game, because I do think that what makes DC special is kind of that DIY, not exactly on the books official sentiment. And I also don't want that to go away, but I want folks to feel safe. So finding that balance of how you can protect the essence of what makes DC nightlife and culture what it is, but also making sure that people can show up and have a good time safely is really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of what I feel like I've been hearing. And again, I would love to speak more with people who aren't part of these sort of more unofficial events, because like I said, not everyone wants to work through official channels. And that's not because they're doing anything wrong. It's just, comes down to individuality and what people need and the sort of vibe that they're looking for. So that's certainly been something on my mind in my reporting, and something I'll be watching this year, especially with this task force continuing going into a new year.
Some of the business owners that you spoke to for the piece, I wonder, do they talk about crime impacting their ability to get folks to come out late at night and to have folks be part of the nightlife that they're offering the city? Is crime a deterrent to folks coming out?
For some of them, yes. The owner of Sticky Fingers, a diner on H Street, she actually, when we spoke, had recently been a victim of a carjacking herself and was fearful that it was maybe because she is seen making deliveries a lot. And one of the things that she did tell me was when they reopened, they had been closed for a large part of the pandemic. They just haven't been able to recoup the same clientele that they had prior to the pandemic. And for her, she felt as though that had to do with people not wanting to come out at night to H Street. Of course, these things don't exist in a vacuum. There's a lot of reasons why people may be choosing not to go out as often or return to different places. But for them, they felt as though the crime did play a role in that.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you talk about, this not occurring in a vacuum. I've got to assume that crime and then just sort of the weirdness of the pandemic where a lot of us were staying inside and then coming back out. I do feel like the temperament on the streets feels a bit different as we're all sort of navigating what it means to be back outside.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that even in my own personal life, too. I mean, I went into the pandemic 23, came out 26, or we're not even out of it yet, but I'm in a different part of my life, so I know that my interests have changed, so that could certainly be playing a role, but it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I aged 2 years in the pandemic, and was it a long 2 years. Like, I went into the pandemic, like, young, really looking to party, came out of the pandemic just trying to garden and have some tea.
Yes, I was like, oh, Nightlife, I remember that back in my day.
What do you see as the future of the task force?
When I was speaking with MPD, I spoke with Officer Morgan Kane, who has been a big part of the task force. They, like I said, are very pleased with the results that they're seeing, and in fact are considering piloting it in other parts of the city that are similarly nightlife hubs and maybe just don't have the same level of oversight. So I honestly think we might see more of it. I will certainly be keeping an eye on the outcomes and also what the community engagement is like. If, as I was hearing in my reporting, is that the community engagement wasn't there as much. So I'm curious if this task force continues, if that is a consideration.
Well, Chelsea Ceruso from Axios DC, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And before you go, here's some quick news. Councilmember Brooke Pinto introduced a DC council bill that would offer residents a rebate on e-bikes. Residents who earn significantly more than the median family income would get up to $400 to buy an e-bike, while anyone earning below would get up to $1,200. The only catch is the e-bike must be purchased at a store in DC. Meanwhile, nearly 100 people showed up to a vigil on Monday for a local trans woman named Jasmine Starr Parker, who was killed in Northeast. The vigil was set up like an open mic, and a lot of people, both activists and city officials, said that the government should be doing more to protect DC's trans community. Parker was 36 years old. Police are still looking for leads on her murder. And lastly, Wes Moore is being sworn in today as the first Black governor of Maryland, and he's doing it with a Bible that belonged to Frederick Douglass. Moore's wife, Dawn, will hold it in a specially designed protective container. Only the new governor's hand will actually touch it. That's all for today here on CityCast DC. And if you enjoyed the show, share it with somebody who loves to party. And don't forget to subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.